Given a request to proceed with a 3,000-word story without an introduction, anchor, or title, I will structure the narrative as a multi-part, continuous stream of text. I will start with part 1, which will be the first segment of the story, and I will indicate when it ends and how to request the next part. The air in the control center tasted metallic, a mix of ozone from the overworked server banks and stale synthetic coffee. Alara didn't look up from the console. Her fingers, stained blue from the diagnostic gel, flew across the holographic interface, compiling 3 million lines of data into a single, blinking red alert. Behind her, Commander Rorik paced, the rhythmic thud of his cybernetic boot a dull counterpoint to the alarm. "Report, analyst," Rorik clipped out. His voice, usually modulated to a deep, calming baritone, was sharp with anxiety. "The anomaly is accelerating, Commander," Alara stated, her voice steady despite the seismic shift the data represented. "Not just expanding, but accelerating." Initial predictive models suggested a linear growth curve over the next 3 stellar cycles. "We are now projecting exponential growth, achieving critical mass in under 30 standard days." She finally paused, raising her eyes to the panoramic window that showed the inky blackness of Sector 7. The anomaly wasn't visible yet. It was still a temporal tear 5 light-years out, but the space surrounding their station, Ethelred, was already beginning to shimmer, a subtle distortion that bent the light of distant galaxies. Rorik stopped pacing. 30 days. That's impossible. My briefing stated 6 months, minimum, even with the worst-case environmental cascade. Your briefing was based on the original dataset, Commander, Alara countered, rotating the interface to display a color-coded spectral analysis. The original tear was a planar event, a 2-dimensional rift. What we're observing now is a 3-dimensional folding of local spacetime. It's drawing in mass and energy from parallel loci. It's hungry. The word hung in the sterile quiet. The purpose of Ethelred, a covert research station positioned on the farthest fringe of the Orion Arm, was simple. Monitor the temporal instability and, if possible, find a way to stabilize it before it swallowed the sector. Now, it was clear that stabilization was off the table. "Initiate the Exodus Protocol," Rorik ordered, his gaze fixed on the shimmering space outside. "Recall all forward recon vessels. We abandon the station. We'll transmit the final data packet via hyperburst and jump to the Sol system." Alara didn't move. "Respectfully, Commander, that will not work." "Alara, I don't need your respect. I need your compliance. I am giving a direct order to save the personnel under my command. And I am telling you, Commander, that if we jump now, we take the anomaly with us." She touched a node, and a simulation materialized above the console. 2 spheres, one representing Ethelred and the other, larger and growing, the anomaly. As the Ethelred sphere initiated its jump, the anomaly's gravitational pull, now confirmed to be temporal, not just spatial, snapped a connection. "The hyperjump process requires temporarily dissolving the local space bubble," Alara explained, her voice gaining a desperate urgency. "That dissolving process will connect us directly to the anomaly's accelerating field. It won't follow us. It will absorb us mid-jump and collapse directly into the terminus point, Earth." Rorik slammed his metal fist on the console's edge. The lights flickered. "Then what? We sit here and wait for the end of the universe." "No," Alara said, her eyes now gleaming with a fierce, almost manic determination. She opened a protected file, Project Chimera, a classified annex she had been running in secret for the past 8 months. "We don't stabilize the tear. We don't run from it. We weaponize it." Rorik stared at the new schematic. It was a massive, angular device of impossible geometry, designed to generate a focused, counter-frequency temporal pulse. "The Temporal Forge," Rorik whispered, recognizing the long-abandoned design from the ancient pre-warp archives. "That requires 2 things we don't possess: a power source capable of outputting 1.21 gigawatts of continuous energy and a terminal anchor capable of stabilizing the feedback loop." Alara gave a faint, humorless smile. "The power source is external. Look at the anomaly, Commander." It is a runaway engine of infinite energy. We don't need to power the forge. We just need to tap the anomaly and redirect its output back onto itself. And the anchor? Alara's gaze dropped to the floor, then rose, fixing on Rorik's cybernetic boot. The terminal anchor must be something outside the local spacetime. Something with a perfectly stable, non-fluctuating internal clock. Something that can be physically inserted at the heart of the anomaly to hold the feedback loop open long enough for the pulse to reach singularity. Rorik felt a sudden chill, a sense of deep, sinking dread that had nothing to do with the freezing temperatures of deep space. You're talking about organic placement. Only an artificially augmented consciousness can survive the temporal feedback long enough to complete the sequence, Alara confirmed, her eyes meeting his without a hint of apology. We need a stabilized, dedicated chronometer to serve as the core. And, Commander, you have the most advanced synthetic chronometer in the system, hardwired directly into your physiology. Rorik's metal hand instinctively went to the socket at his neck, where the chronometer interface was embedded. You want to turn my heart into a bomb. I want to use your stability to save the sector, Alara corrected. The forge is almost complete. It was always the failsafe. But it needs the anchor to function, and we need to deploy it now. We have less than 30 days until the anomaly reaches the orbit of the Ethelred and makes any escape, even a suicidal one, impossible. He turned away from the shimmering view, away from the data, and walked to the wall locker where his ceremonial combat armor was stored. It had been years since he'd worn it, since the war that had cost him his leg and made him the commander he was. The armor was a relic, a painful reminder of a life he thought he'd left behind. You've been preparing this, Rorik said, the statement devoid of accusation, merely a recognition of a terrible, necessary truth. You knew this day might come. I ran the probabilities. Your life versus the entire sector? The equation is cruel, Commander, but undeniable. He opened the locker. The cold, black metal gleamed under the emergency lights. If I do this, what are the odds of success? Don't give me the statistical model. Give me the visceral truth. Alara hesitated, her composure cracking for the first time. The probability is so low it's barely quantifiable. But without the attempt, the probability of failure for all life in the sector is 100%. Rorik ran a hand over the smooth plating of the armor. Then we do it. But I need to be briefed on the deployment mechanism. I will not die blind, analyst. The deployment will be by personal shuttle, manually piloted into the densest section of the tear, Alara began, pulling up a new display that showed the logistics of the mission, every detail brutally calculated for efficiency and finality. Once you are inside the tear, the time dilation will be immense. You'll have seconds of objective time, but subjectively, it could be hours. You must maintain consciousness and activate the chronometer sequence at the precise moment I trigger the forge. And what about you? Rorik asked, pulling the heavy breastplate from the locker. I will remain here. I am the only one who can operate the forge. When I fire it, the entire Ethelred will be vaporized. It's the final necessary cost for the output surge. Rorik paused in the act of donning the armor. He looked at her, truly seeing the young woman who had served under him for years, a woman he had barely known beyond her data streams and predictive models. No last words, analyst? She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Just one more task, Commander. Before you leave, seal the bridge. I don't want anyone else coming in to stop me. Rorik finished securing the breastplate. The metal was cold against his chest, but his resolve was colder. Consider it done. He turned, his imposing figure dwarfing the small woman at the console, and walked toward the emergency airlock that led to the shuttle bay. The rhythmic thud-thud-thud of his cybernetic boot echoed through the empty corridors, the sound of a countdown beginning. As soon as he was gone, Alara's fingers returned to the controls, but not to the forge. She opened a private channel to the main residential wing. This is Analyst Alara. Everyone, I need your attention. This is a restricted message under Level 0 security clearance. I am initiating an evacuation. There is no time for the automated announcement. She leaned close to the comms mic, her voice dropping to a fierce, urgent whisper. The commander has begun the deployment of the temporal forge. It will buy you 27 minutes. Get to the escape pods.
Now.
Run. She slammed the comms panel, cutting off any possible response. The lie was necessary. Rorik's sacrifice required silence and isolation. He could not know that his deployment was simply a distraction, a final, necessary illusion to ensure the crew's escape. The real anchor, the final chronometer, was still here. Alara pulled open a hidden panel beneath the main console. Inside, humming with a low, terrifying energy, was a custom-built, bio-linked temporal anchor. A device designed to stabilize the feedback loop that would make the forge fire, a device keyed to her own physiology. Rorik's cybernetics were a decoy. Hers was the truly stable chronometer, built into her from birth, the secret of Project Chimera. She connected the anchor's power, leads to the main console. The metallic tang in the air intensified, replaced by a scent of ozone and burning copper. The main console flared to life, casting the entire control room in a terrifying red glow. Outside, Rorik's small shuttle disengaged from the ethyl red, a tiny metal splinter heading into the vast, shimmering void where the anomaly was rapidly expanding. Commander Rorik, Alara's voice crackled over the ship-to-ship comms, the professional tone back in place. You are cleared for sublight acceleration. Your trajectory is locked. Begin manual insertion. A beat of silence. Understood, analyst. Good luck. Alara watched his ship shrink, racing toward the shimmering edge of reality. He was brave, she thought, and foolishly loyal. And now, he was gone, heading toward a necessary death while believing he was the solution. She closed her eyes, took a deep, shaky breath, and began to run the final sequence. Her hands flew over the controls, locking the station doors, initiating the self-destruct sequence, and rerouting all primary power directly into the temporal forge, a huge, multi-ton mass of twisted superconductors and alien alloys that dominated the center of the control room. The station's automated voice chimed an alert. Self-destruct sequence initiated. Time to detonation. 3 o'clock. Alara ignored it. She focused on the bio-linked temporal anchor now humming in the console. Her heart rate, blood pressure, and neural activity were displayed as 3 stable, green lines across the screen. These stable biological metrics were the terminal anchor, the forge required, a biological clock immune to the fluctuations of technology. She was the failsafe. She had designed this moment. She had trained for this death. The only thing she hadn't anticipated was the silence of the station. She had always imagined chaos, panic screams. Instead, she had the deafening quiet of the countdown. Time to detonation. 2:15. On the main screen, Rorik's shuttle reached the point of no return. The shimmering space around the tear was now a vortex of twisting color and fractured light. It looked like a vast, bruised eye opening in the cosmos. Analyst, I'm at the insertion point. Beginning chronometer activation. Rorik's voice came, strained but steady. Alara knew the chronometer he was activating was inert, a piece of dummy code. But she had to play her part. Confirmed, Commander. Commencing forge power-up in T-minus 60 seconds. Brace for temporal distortion. She reached for the final, heavy lever. It was the only part of the forge that required manual, physical activation. The metal was cold and massive. Time to detonation 1:30. She looked one last time at the window. Rorik's shuttle winked out, swallowed by the anomaly's churning colors. He was inside the temporal loop now, experiencing seconds as hours, believing his core was the anchor, fighting his final, lonely battle for the entire sector. Alara didn't shed a tear. There was no time for that. She grasped the lever with both hands, her knuckles white. The emergency red lights pulsed in time with the rapidly increasing alarms. She thought of the evacuation she had ordered. She had given them less than 3 minutes to reach the pods and jump. It wasn't enough time. Some would make it, but many would not. She had traded the lives of her team for the lives of a sector. The forge began to scream, a high-pitched, vibrating wail that resonated deep in her bones. The console began to spark, the power surge overwhelming the station's delicate systems. Time to detonation. 0:45. Forge. Analyst, I don't feel the chronometer engaging. I'm losing stability. What is happening? Rorik's voice was frantic, distorted by the temporal energy, a final, despairing plea. Alara closed her eyes against the burning light. I'm sorry, Commander, she whispered, pulling the heavy lever down with a final, desperate heave. The world dissolved into a blinding, white-hot flash. A focused beam of impossible energy erupted from the Ethelred, a temporal pulse that pierced the heart of the anomaly. It held for a brief, eternal moment, forcing the chaotic tear to feed back on its own accelerating energy. The feedback loop achieved singularity. The anomaly shrieked. It collapsed inward, imploding upon itself, taking Rorik, the Ethelred, and Alara with it. Then there was only silence. Absolute, profound, cosmic silence. You are asking for the continuation of the 3,000-word story. Here is part 2, approximately 1,500 words, of the narrative. The silence was the first thing that returned. Not the vacuum of space, which had its own quiet hum, but a complete, deafening absence of sound. Alara opened her eyes. She wasn't vaporized. She wasn't anywhere. She was floating in a soup of non-existence. The temporal forge was gone. The console was gone. Her body felt different. She brought a hand up to her face. It was solid, but the light that hit it didn't reflect. It refracted into a million tiny spectral needles. Her hand was real, yet unreal, existing as a waveform more than as mass. She had become a ghost in the machine of the universe. The singularity hadn't destroyed her, it had splintered her. The temporal anchor, keyed to her chronometer, had done its job. It had stabilized the collapse, preventing the anomaly from spreading. But in stabilizing the field, it had used her as the stabilizing agent, scattering her consciousness and physical form across the resulting temporal wake. She was no longer constrained by space or time. A flicker of thought, and she saw the remnants of the Ethelred, a swirling cloud of energized dust, rapidly dissipating. Another thought, and she saw Rorik's shuttle, not destroyed, but frozen, encased in a timeless amber at the exact moment he activated the dummy chronometer. He was safe, in a sense, preserved in a moment that would never end. Alara pushed her new form, a purely energetic manifestation of will, towards the star charts, the actual, spatial location where the anomaly had been. The empty space was clear now, the light of distant galaxies steady and undisturbed. The sector was saved. Her lie had worked. The crew she'd forced into the escape pods had likely made their desperate jump and were now safe in Sol System, reporting a heroic sacrifice by their commander and analyst. But the silence was beginning to feel less like peace and more like a prison. To exist without the friction of reality. No air, no pain, no hunger, no sense of time passing, was to be utterly alone. She was an observer, a consciousness adrift in the cosmic archives. A sudden, sharp pulse of energy interrupted the profound stillness. It wasn't a natural occurrence. It was a beacon. Alara focused her scattered awareness on the source. It was millions of light-years away, well outside the jurisdiction of the Orion Arm, beyond the explored limits of the known galaxy. The pulse was coherent, structured, and most importantly, it was calling to her. She realized the temporal forge hadn't just collapsed the anomaly. The massive energy burst of the feedback loop had ripped a second, stable, temporary conduit through the fabric of space-time. And that beacon was on the other side. It was a choice between eternal, meaningless observation and a potentially suicidal journey. With a determination that burned hotter than the forge itself, Alara focused her will. She didn't travel in the conventional sense. She reformed. She dissolved her dispersed waveform and concentrated it, a furious knot of energy, aiming for the origin point of the beacon. The journey was a blur of fractured colors and mathematical noise. She passed through dimensions she didn't know existed, experienced the birth and death of stars in microseconds, and felt the chilling, alien indifference of true cosmic vastness. Then, She slammed back into existence. She was standing, solid mass returning with a shocking, painful jolt. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of flowering alien flora and ozone. She was on a platform made of smooth, obsidian-like rock, surrounded by colossal, bioluminescent trees whose canopies formed a glowing, cathedral-like ceiling. Before her stood the source of the beacon. It was a structure built not of metal or stone, but of woven light. It hummed with the same coherent energy that had called her. Standing at the base of the structure was an entity, not humanoid, but impossible to define. It was tall, slender, and seemed to be made entirely of crystallized twilight. Its form shifted constantly, its edges never quite fixed. The entity didn't have a mouth, yet a voice resonated directly inside Alara's mind, clear, genderless, and impossibly ancient. The chronometer soul. It is good you answer the call, little echo. Alara staggered, her returned body protesting the sudden gravity. Where am I? What are you? You are at the nexus. And I am the weaver. I mend the fabric that mortals tear. Asterisk, you were not meant to survive the collapse. You are a paradox. The temporal anchor should have been consumed, rendering the sequence safe, not scattered and reassembled. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I built in a failsafe, Alara stated, pushing down the raw panic that threatened to overwhelm her. The biological chronometer. It was designed to withstand the feedback. Foolish optimism, or necessary genius. It matters little now. Your action saved your sector, but it has created a flaw in the wider tapestry. That flaw is you. The weaver gestured with a crystalline appendage toward the woven light structure. The structure solidified, and Alara saw that it wasn't a temple or a ship. It was a gigantic, complex loom. And on that loom was woven the reality of their entire local cluster, stars, planets, and the thin, shimmering lines of space-time that connected them. The anomaly was a stray thread. You cut it, but your scissors left a tear. And that tear threatens to unravel everything your single act saved. What do I have to do? Alara asked. The question was instinctual. Her entire life had been about problem-solving, even when the solution required her death. Now that death had been postponed, the duty remained. You are the flaw. Therefore, you must become the needle. Your unique state, part human, part chronometer, now existing between the layers of time, makes you capable of moving through the lattice. Asterisk, asterisk. The weaver explained, projecting images directly into Alara's mind. Visions of other, smaller temporal tiers appearing across the saved sector, microanomalies, side effects of the massive forge blast. These weren't world-ending events, but they were destabilizing, causing minor disruptions. Planets shifting slightly in orbit, communications failing, history subtly editing itself. The collateral damage of your solution must be addressed. You must enter these fractures and, using your chronometer core, stabilize them. You'll seal the tiers from the inside. Asterisk, asterisk. And if I don't, then the microanomalies multiply. They connect. They will pull your sector into a slow, agonizing chronological entropy. Your people will not be destroyed in fire, but will simply cease to have ever been. Asterisk, asterisk. Alara understood. She hadn't bought them 6 months of life. She had bought them a slow, chronological death, unless she fixed it. What is the risk to me? Every correction will further drain the stability of your anchor. You are running on borrowed time. The core cannot sustain indefinite temporal travel. Eventually, the flaw will be consumed, and you will be dispersed utterly, irretrievably. You will be erased from the loom. Asterisk, asterisk. The weaver offered no comfort, only the terrible terms of her new existence. How do I find the tears? The crystalline entity shifted, and a faint, pulsating light emerged from its chest, the beacon that had called her. It floated over to Alara and dissolved into her chest, merging with the cold, precise hum of the artificial chronometer in her heart. The chronometer soul is now linked to the weaver's sight. You will sense the tears as dissonances in the temporal field.
Go.
The first fracture is already growing unstable. Asterisk, asterisk. Before Alara could utter another word, the world around her twisted. The obsidian rock, the glowing trees, the crystalline weaver, all dissolved into a swirling vortex of green and gold light. She felt the painful wrench of reformation, her body dissolving back into a stream of pure energy, then being violently reconstituted somewhere else. She opened her eyes, gasping. She was no longer on an alien world, but in a dusty, dimly lit museum storage facility. She was surrounded by crates marked with Earth historical dates, 1945, 1776, medieval artifacts. The air here felt thick, wrong. The light was dull, and the shadows seemed to writhe. She looked down at her hands. The spectral shimmer was gone. She was fully solid, but she could feel the temporal dissonance vibrating through her bones. The first microanomaly was here. She followed the growing vibration, the weaver's sight guiding her chronometer core, to a large, heavy crate in the corner. It was unmarked. As she approached, the wood of the crate began to steam, and the air around it grew unnaturally cold. She cautiously lifted the lid. Inside, resting on velvet, was a single, innocuous object, a pristine and used ink pen, silver and gold, clearly expensive. It looked like a museum piece, but as she focused on it, Alara felt the object fighting the timeline. This pen, she realized, was leaking time. She concentrated the power of her anchor. The silver pen began to glow with a sickly green light. The world around them, the storage facility, the crates, began to flicker, shifting like a poorly rendered hologram. For a second, the crate next to her was dated 2050, then 1890, then settled back to 1945. The pen was rewriting the history of this room, subtly contaminating the artifacts around it, threatening to undo a century of recorded history. Alara knew the procedure. She had to use her own stable core to override the object's chaotic timeline, forcing it to accept its proper place. It was a brutal, non-scientific act of pure will. She reached out and grasped the pen. The silver metal was searingly cold.